The marriage notice was nailed to the post outside Harrow's trading post on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, every soul in Dust Creek had read it twice. Silas Sullivan had not written it. He stood at the edge of the crowd that gathered around that post, his hat pulled low against the autumn wind, and read the words with the same hollow shock that had settled into his chest the moment old Harrow's boy had come running to his homestead with the news. The notice was written in his name. It bore his father's seal, the SS brand that marked the Sullivan land claim, the one Silas had inherited the year before when a fever took his father quick and hard in the dead of winter. The notice declared, in the clipped legal language of the border authority, that Silas Wren Sullivan, 26 years of age, sole holder of the Sullivan land grant, would take as wife one Mazoga Darkwolf, daughter of Clan Darkwolf, as part of the peace settlement brokered between the Borderlands Council and the Orc clans of the Grayville Ridge. He had not agreed to this. He had not been asked. The crowd around the post was already murmuring, and Silas could feel the shapes of their thoughts even before they spoke. He caught fragments. Sullivan homestead, that is 50 good acres, and a Sullivan taking an Orc bride. And worst of all, the low mean laughter from the corner where Red Gallo and his two brothers always leaned against the saloon wall like they had been carved there. Silas pulled the notice off the post, folded it, and tucked it into his coat. He walked to Harrow's, pushed the door open, and stood before the counter where old Harrow himself sat behind a ledger. Harrow was a barrel-shaped man with a gray beard trimmed close and the perpetual air of someone who knew more than he would say. "Explain," Silas said. Harrow looked up slowly. "Your father signed a preliminary agreement with the council 2 winters before he passed. It was a land security arrangement. In the event that the Darkwolf clan ceded their northern range peacefully, one of their daughters would be given in settlement to the Sullivan land to secure alliance. My father never told me. Your father assumed you would marry before it came to matter." Harrow shrugged, which was as close to an apology as the man had ever come to anything. "She arrives on the Friday wagon." Silas stood very still. "Where is she supposed to stay?" "Your homestead, Sullivan. That is what the notice says." He walked out of Harrow's with the folded notice in his pocket and stood in the dust of Dust Creek's main street for a long moment, looking at nothing. The mountains were blue in the distance. The wind smelled like pine and coming cold. He thought about his father, a hard, practical man who had loved this land more than he had loved anything else in the world except perhaps his wife, Silas's mother, who had been gone 12 years now. He thought about the 50 acres he had plowed and fenced and coaxed into productivity alone, the cabin he had repaired board by board, the well he had dug with his own hands. He thought about a woman who did not know she was being sent away. He thought about that for a long time. When Friday came, Silas was at the wagon stop. He was the only one there who was not there to gawk. The weekly wagon came in from the east, rolling heavy and loud over the rutted road, and the crowd that had assembled, because of course there was a crowd, Dust Creek being the sort of town that treated any novelty as a festival, pressed forward when the driver called out his stop. Barrels and crates were handed down first, then a family of settlers who had the look of people who had been traveling too long and were no longer surprised by anything. And then she stepped down, and the crowd went quiet. Mazoga Darkwolf was not what they had expected. Silas could see that in the way people's bodies changed, the leaning forward replaced by a half step back, the curiosity curdling into something more complicated. She was tall, within an inch of Silas's own height, with the broad, capable shoulders of a woman who had lived hard and worked harder. Her skin was a deep sage green, smooth and warm-toned in the autumn light, and her black hair was braided back from her face in a complex pattern that must have taken time and care to create. Her features were strong, a square jaw with the subtle lower tusks typical of Orc women, a broad, straight nose, high cheekbones that caught the light sharply. Her eyes, when they swept the crowd, were dark amber, the color of pine resin, and they were not afraid, but they were absolutely, precisely evaluating every single person they landed on. She wore a fitted leather bodice, dark brown and well-made, laced tight over a deep burgundy linen blouse that tucked into close-fitted riding leathers the color of charcoal. Her boots were tall and worn, practical, with a sheathed knife at the left one. She carried a single pack over one shoulder and held herself like someone who had been told all her life that posture was the first line of defense. The crowd was murmuring again. Silas heard Red Gallo say something that made his brothers laugh. Silas walked forward through the crowd before he had fully decided to do so. "Mazoga Darkwolf," he said. She turned those amber eyes on him, and up close they were even more striking, layered, like there were at least 4 different kinds of wariness and intelligence operating behind them simultaneously. "You are Sullivan," she said. Her voice was low and even. Her common tongue was precise, with a rhythm that suggested she had learned it deliberately rather than absorbed it. "Silas Sullivan," he said. He took off his hat. "I want you to know, before anything else, that I did not know about this arrangement until this week. I am not saying that to excuse it. I am saying it because you deserve to know the truth of who you are dealing with." Something shifted in her face. It was very small. "I was told 2 months ago," she said. "I was given no choice." "Neither was I," he said. "Not really." He looked at her steadily. "You do not have to come to my homestead if you do not want to. But it is the only offer I have to make, and I will make it honestly. You will have your own room, your own space, and no one will require anything of you that you do not agree to. You have my word." She looked at him for a long moment. The crowd was still watching. He could feel their eyes like a physical weight. "Your word," she said. It was not quite a question. It was something between a question and a test. "My word," he said. She looked at the crowd, then at the dusty street, then back at him. "Then I will come to your homestead," she said. "For now," he nodded. "My wagon is around the back of Harrow's. I will get your pack." "I will carry my own pack," she said immediately. "Fair enough," he said. He led her around to where the wagon sat, and not one person in that crowd said anything to him directly, though he heard plenty behind his back as they walked away. He helped her up onto the wagon bench. She accepted the hand up with visible reluctance, as if calculating whether rejecting it would cost more than accepting it, and then climbed up himself and took the reins. They rode out of Dust Creek in silence. The road north to the Sullivan homestead was 40 minutes of pine forest and open meadow, rutted and unpredictable in the way of all frontier roads. The sky was very blue and very wide above the tree line. After 10 minutes of silence, she said, "What do you expect from me?" He considered the question seriously. "I expect nothing that you have not agreed to," he said. "We are strangers. That is the honest situation." "The notice says wife," she said. "The notice says a lot of things," he said. "But a piece of paper cannot make 2 people anything that they have not chosen to be." Another silence. Then carefully, as if she was testing the weight of the words, she said, "In my clan, when a binding is made, there is a ceremony. The 2 people speak their intentions before the clan. There is a fire. There is a challenge." She paused. "I do not know this custom, this piece of paper, this notice on a post. I do not understand what it means to your people." He looked at her sideways. She was watching the road ahead, her back straight, her hands folded precisely in her lap. "Honestly," he said, "I'm not sure it means anything real without the choice behind it." He paused. "Tell me about your ceremony, the clan one." She looked at him then sharply, as if she had expected him to dismiss what she said or use it against her somehow. "Why?" "Because you mentioned it," he said, "and because you are sitting on my wagon on the way to my homestead, and I would like to actually know something about you beyond your name." A very long silence. The horses moved steadily through the pines. "The fire is built by both of them," she said finally. "Together. Neither one touches it alone. And when it burns, they speak what they intend, not vows exactly, intentions, what they will try to be. And the clan witnesses it, and that is the binding." She paused again. "It is not perfect. Some bindings break, but at least both people had to decide." "That sounds more real than a piece of paper nailed to a post," Silas said. She did not answer, but something in her posture changed, very slightly, like a door opened a half-inch. The homestead came into view around a bend in the road. A solid log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that needed a new board on the south wall, a well, a kitchen garden that was going to brown at the edges, 50 acres of good land spreading out behind it toward a tree line that burned red and orange in the fall. It was not grand, but it was solid and real and entirely his. He watched her take it in. "The south field is winter wheat," he said. "The barn has a mare and 2 oxen. The cabin has 2 rooms. There is a second one at the back that has been a storeroom, but it has a window, and I will clear it out today. It will be yours." He looked at her. "I mean what I say." She looked at the cabin for a long moment. "I believe you," she said, and then quieter, almost to herself, "I do not know why." He set the brake and climbed down and held out his hand to help her. This time she took it without calculating, just took it, and he felt the warmth and strength of her grip and did not think anything about it except that it was a good, honest hand. He cleared the back room that afternoon. It took 3 hours, moving barrels and crates of his father's old tools and supplies into the barn loft, and when he was done the room was plain but clean. A narrow bed frame that he dug out of the barn loft and fitted with a rope bottom, a straw mattress, a wool blanket, a small table, and the lantern from the hallway. He carried in an armload of firewood and set the small iron stove in the corner going so the room would be warm before the temperature dropped with evening. She had spent the afternoon in the kitchen garden, he noticed. When he came around the side of the cabin, she was crouched at the edge of the beds, pulling weeds that had gotten ahead of the late-season kale and turnips, moving with the focused efficiency of someone who understood growing things. She did not look up when he came around the corner. "You do not have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "I wanted something to do with my hands." He did not argue with that. He cooked that evening a pot of elk stew from the carcass he had put up last week, with biscuits baked in the iron pan. He set 2 bowls on the table and called her in from where she had been sitting on the porch watching the dark come over the mountains. She sat down across from him and looked at the bowl. She looked at the biscuit. She picked it up, turned it over, set it back down. "I do not know this custom," she said, "eating at a table together. In my clan, the women ate with the women and the men with the men, unless it was a feast day. You are welcome to eat wherever you like," he said, "but you are also welcome to eat here if you want." She picked up the biscuit again and took a bite. She chewed it carefully. Something in her expression shifted, not quite pleasure but recognition. "It is good," she said. "Thank you," he said. They ate in silence for a while, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that happened when 2 people were still figuring out the shape of things. "My father thought this would be a good arrangement," she said, without looking up from her bowl. "He thought land security was worth more than my choice in the matter. He has 7 daughters. I was the 4th. She said it very flatly, the way people said things they had already finished grieving and were now just reporting. "I am sorry," Silas said, and he meant it. She looked up then. "Are you?" "Yes," he said. "You deserve to be asked." She held his gaze for a moment, and he did not look away. Something passed between them, not love, not yet, nothing so warm or clear as that, but recognition. The simple acknowledgement of 2 people who had been handed a situation they had not created and who were both trying to decide what to do with honesty. "I will stay until spring," she said, "and then I will decide." "That is more than fair," he said. October moved through the valley with the smell of wood smoke and frost. Silas woke before dawn every day as he always had and worked the land, putting the winter wheat to bed, repairing the barn's south wall, splitting firewood against the cold that everyone who had lived here long enough knew was coming like a wall. He offered Mazoga no tasks and asked nothing of her, and he noticed, without comment, the way she gradually found her own work. She took over the kitchen garden entirely by the 2nd week, saving seeds from the last of the season's plants with a knowledge and care that told him she had been growing things for a long time. She repaired a section of fence along the east pasture that had been sagging since the summer, using a technique he had never seen, weaving the rail into the post rather than nailing it, stronger than his way. When he raised an eyebrow at it, she said simply, "Clan work. We did not waste nails on fence. He started leaving tools out for her, not as a task, just as an offer. She used them and put them back, always exactly where she found them. By the third week, she was cooking half the meals. She did not ask if she could. She simply did it, and when he came in at midday, there was food on the table. He ate it and told her it was good and meant it, and she received the compliment with a slight nod and went back to whatever she was doing. What he noticed, though, what built in him quietly, without announcement, was the way she moved. She moved like someone who had never in her life wasted emotion, and it gave everything she did a quality of grace that was not delicate but was absolutely unmistakable. When she carried water from the well, when she turned the soil over in the garden, when she sat in the evening on the porch and sharpened the kitchen knife with long, even strokes on the whetstone she had brought in her pack, there was this quality to it that made him aware of her in a way that was not quite comfortable and not quite unpleasant. He did not look too long. He was aware enough of himself to know what looking too long meant, and he did not think she needed that from him right now. But he noticed. The first real test came in early November, on a market day in Dust Creek. They had not gone to town together yet. He had gone twice for supplies and she had stayed at the homestead. But the big autumn market came once a year, and he needed to sell 3 cords of winter wood he had gotten ahead on, and she had said over breakfast, with the careful neutrality of someone who was not asking for anything, that she needed thread and a new awl. "Come with me then," he said. "I have the wagon." She looked at him for a moment. "They will stare." "Let them stare," he said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she got up and cleared her bowl and went to get her pack. They drove into Dust Creek on market day, and the town was full. The main street was lined with stalls, smoked meats, root vegetables, wool goods, leather, tools. The blacksmith from the valley had his wagon of ironwork set up near the post office. The noise of people and animals and the smell of wood smoke and spices pressed in from all sides. Silas tied the team near the woodyard and began the business of selling the cords. Mazoga moved along the stalls at his side for the first few minutes, and he watched in his peripheral vision the way the crowd parted around her, not gracefully, but in the edged way of people who were making a point of their discomfort. He heard comments. He did not look at the people making them. She held herself perfectly straight and did not acknowledge any of it. They found the dry goods stall near the center of the market, and Mazoga was examining thread spools when it happened. A woman named Carla Gallo, Red's wife, a hard-mouthed woman with a grudge collection that was almost impressive in its scope, stepped directly in front of Mazoga and said, loudly enough for the people around them to hear, "You should not be at this market. You do not belong here. Go back to wherever the Borderlands Authority dug you up from." Mazoga went very still. Silas moved. He was at her shoulder in 3 strides, and he stepped slightly forward, not between them exactly, because Mazoga did not need to be hidden behind him, but clearly beside her, his shoulder close to hers, facing Carla Gallo directly. "Carla," he said very quietly, "I need you to step away. Sullivan, you have lost your mind bringing that creature to our market. She is my guest," he said, "and she is buying thread, same as anyone." He held Carla Gallo's gaze with the steady calm that he had learned from his father, the kind of quiet that did not waver or break. "Step away." Carla Gallo's eyes moved between him and Mazoga and back again, and whatever she found there made her mouth press into a thin line. She stepped away, not gracefully, but she stepped. The murmuring of the nearby crowd did not stop, but its tone shifted. Silas turned to Mazoga. She was looking at him with an expression he had not seen on her before, not gratitude exactly, but something rower than that, something unguarded. "You did not have to do that," she said, low enough that only he could hear. "Yes, I did," he said. She looked down at the thread in her hand and then placed her coins on the stall counter and took the thread. She turned toward the wagon without another word, and he walked beside her, and the crowd let them pass, and he felt the weight of every eye in Dust Creek on his back like a garment. At the wagon, he loaded the remaining wood that had not sold and climbed up after her and took the reins. She had not said anything since the thread stall. He did not push it. They were halfway back up the forest road before she spoke. In my clan, no one would have done that, she said. Not for me, not in front of others. He glanced at her. Then your clan was wrong about you. She was looking at the road ahead, and the afternoon light came through the pines in long gold bars and fell across her face, and he saw her jaw tighten slightly the way it did when she was holding something in. He looked away. Thank you, she said, so quiet it was barely sound. You are welcome, he said. They rode the rest of the way home in a silence that was completely different from the silence of the first day. Something had changed shape between them like a knot releasing. That evening, she made dinner without any fuss. A pot of grain porridge with dried berries, and the last of the autumn honey from his stores, something she had told him was a clan cold-weather staple. He ate 2 bowls of it, and she watched him with a look that was almost amused. You do not need to look so surprised, she said. I am not surprised, he said. I am appreciating. She pressed her lips together, but the corner curved upward, just slightly. He stored that away carefully. November deepened into cold. The first real snowfall came on a Wednesday night, quiet and complete, turning the world white by morning. Silas was up before it was light, getting the animals settled and the paths clear, and when he came in for breakfast she was already up, had already put the fire higher and the kettle on, and handed him a tin mug of something hot the moment he came through the door. He was so cold that the warmth of the mug was almost painful. Thank you, he managed. She looked at him critically. Your coat is not warm enough, she said. It is what I have. I can make it warmer, she said, in the tone she used when she was not asking but was offering, and the distinction mattered. If you bring me the furs from the barn loft, I saw them. There are wolf pelts and some rabbit. I can line the coat. He looked at her. She looked back steadily, and there was nothing in her expression except competence and a kind of determined practicality that was, he was starting to understand, the way she expressed caring. I will get the furs, he said. She spent 3 evenings on the coat with a bone needle and sinew thread she produced from her pack, working by lantern light at the kitchen table while he did the books from the fall harvest. He would look up sometimes and find her bent over the stitching, her dark braids falling forward over her shoulders, the lamplight warm on her green skin, her lower tusks visible where her lips were slightly parted in concentration, and he would look away before she noticed. When she was done, she handed him the coat across the table. The lining was perfect wolf pelt sewn in with tight, even stitches, finished at the collar with a strip of rabbit fur. He put it on. It was like stepping into warmth itself. This is remarkable work, he said. It is clan work, she said. Any woman in my clan could do it. But you did it, he said, for me. She looked at the table. You need a warm coat, she said. It is practical. It is kind, he said. She looked up then, and he saw something in her amber eyes, a kind of startled vulnerability, as if kindness was a word she was not used to having applied to herself. As if she had been offering practical things for so long that someone naming them as kind felt like speaking a foreign language she had only heard at a distance. He did not push it further. He just thanked her again and wore the coat every day after that, and she saw him wearing it, and he thought he saw, once or twice, the smallest satisfaction move across her face. December brought true winter. The passes filled with snow and Dust Creek became largely isolated, the way it did every year, thrown back on itself and its own resources. Silas and Mazoga settled into a rhythm that was domestic without being spoken. He handled the heavy outdoor work. She managed the kitchen and the storing and the mending. They split the midday and evening work between them with a wordless negotiation that had developed entirely from observation of what needed doing and who was best placed to do it. He noticed everything about her. He noticed that she was a light sleeper. He would sometimes hear her moving in the back room in the deep of the night, and once saw a line of lamplight under her door at 3 in the morning. He noticed that she had a way of going still and listening to the land outside. She would pause in whatever she was doing and turn her head slightly, and he would see that she was hearing something the way a wild creature hears something, with her whole body. He noticed that she kept a small carved wooden figure on the table in her room. He had seen it once when the door was open, a rearing wolf no larger than his thumb, worn smooth with handling. He did not ask about it. Some things were not his to ask yet. They talked more as December went on. Long evenings with the fire built high and the world frozen and white outside, and the two of them on opposite sides of the kitchen table with their work and their words. She told him about the Grayville Ridge, the forests so old they had no tops you could see from the ground, the winters so hard that the snow came level with the cabin eaves, the way the clan moved like one body through it all because moving like one body was survival. She told it without sentimentality, with the same flat precision she used for everything, but underneath it he could hear the love she had for that place, the way a person's voice changes when they talk about something they carry inside themselves. He told her about his father, not the heroic version, the real one, a man who had been capable and occasionally cruel, and who had loved this land to the exclusion of nearly everything else, including, often, his son. He told her about his mother who had died when he was 14, and how the homestead had been just him and his father for 12 years after that, and how they had never really talked, and how his father had died in the winter cold with things unresolved between them that could not be resolved now. She listened without interjecting and without filling the silences with comfort. She simply listened, and when he was done she said, "He tried to give you something. The arrangement. It was wrong, but it was trying." He thought about that for a long time. That might be the most generous interpretation anyone has ever given him, he said. It might be the only one I can afford, she said, and the way she said it told him she was talking as much about her own father as his. He looked at her across the table and she looked at him, and the firelight was between them and the whole winter world was outside and everything was very still. He reached across the table and touched the back of her hand. Not gripping, not claiming, just one touch, light and deliberate and honest. She looked down at his hand on hers. She did not pull away. After a moment she turned her hand over and her fingers closed lightly around his, and they sat like that for a while without saying anything, and it was the first time either of them had chosen to touch the other. She pulled her hand back eventually, gently, and went back to her work. He went back to his, but the room felt different after that. Warmer, and not from the fire. January was brutal. The temperature dropped to places Silas had not seen in years, and the work of keeping the homestead alive, the animals watered, the firewood burning, the food stocks managed was consuming and constant. He came in one afternoon from the barn with his hands so cold he could barely hold the door handle, and she met him at the door and took his hands between hers without a word and held them, warming them with the heat of her own grip, and he stood in the doorway and let her, and looked at her face bent over his hands, frowning slightly with the focus of the task, and felt something shift permanently in his chest. He knew what it was. He had been carefully not naming it for a while now, the way you avoid putting a candle near something flammable until you are ready for the fire. He was ready to name it now, just not to her. Not yet. What he did not expect was the trouble that came with February. Red Gallo had been building to something all winter. Silas knew this the way you know weather is coming, in the quality of the silence from a certain direction, in the rumors that reached him second-hand, in the way people in town looked at him when he made the rare supply run, with a combination of pity and warning that told him something was being discussed without him. He found out what it was on a gray February morning when he came out of the cabin to find 3 men on horseback at his gate. Red Gallo, his brother Vance, and a third man Silas did not know, but who wore the badge of the Borderlands Authority on his coat. They had a paper. Silas came down from the porch and stopped at the gate and looked at them levelly. "Red," he said, "Sullivan." Red Gallo had the kind of face that had been handsome once but had curdled into something harder with years of resenting everyone who had something he thought he deserved. "This here is Officer Crane from the Borderlands Authority. He has some questions about your arrangement." "What arrangement?" Silas said. Officer Crane held out the paper. "The marriage settlement. The Borderlands Council has received a complaint, signed by 12 Dust Creek citizens, that the arrangement has not been honored in good faith." The claim is that you have not formalized the marriage as required by the settlement terms, and that in the absence of formalization, the land security clause defaults and the Darkwolf clansman's land rights over the 50-acre Sullivan grant are null, and you must return the Orc woman to the border authority for reassignment. Silas looked at the paper. He looked at Red Gallo. Reassignment, he said. It is in the terms, Crane said. He did not look comfortable. He was a young man, actually, with a nervous quality about the eyes that told Silas he had not expected to be the one delivering this. And what does reassignment mean, specifically? Silas said. She would be held at the Border Authority facility until a new settlement is arranged. A Border Authority facility. He knew what that meant. Everyone on the frontier knew what that meant. It was a holding house for Orc captives, originally built for war prisoners, and the conditions in it were the subject of rumors he had never wanted to believe but had always known were probably true. He looked at Red Gallo, who was watching him with barely concealed satisfaction. He looked at the badge on Crane's coat. He looked at the paper. What would formalize it, he said. In the authorities' terms. Crane blinked. A recorded ceremony before a recognized official. A signature by both parties in the settlement register. It must be done at the authority office in Dusk Creek. When is the deadline? Crane looked at the paper. The complaint was filed 3 days ago. You have 14 days to show compliance or the reassignment order takes effect. Silas took the paper. He folded it. He looked at Red Gallo. You drove out here in February cold to deliver this personally, he said. You must have very little to do. Red Gallo's face darkened. You had better think carefully about what you are doing, Sullivan. You are making enemies over a person, Silas said. Get off my land. He turned and walked back to the cabin. He heard the horses behind him shifting and Red Gallo's voice saying something low and ugly to his brother, and then the sound of them riding away down the road. He went inside. Mazoga was at the kitchen table. She had heard. Her face was very controlled, that specific control he had come to recognize as the thing she put on when she was managing fear and would not show it. He set the paper on the table. He looked at her. You heard, he said. I heard, she said. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He put his hands flat on the table. He thought about how to say it. I am going to say something, he said, and I need you to hear the truth of it and not the obligation of it. I need you to hear it as one person speaking honestly to another. She looked at him. Say it. I do not want to formalize anything that you do not want, he said. If you want to leave, if you want to find a different path than this one, on your own terms, I will help you do that. I have enough saved to get you passage east, and I know people in the valley who would not turn away an honest worker, and I would write you the best letter of character you have ever seen and make sure no one bothered you about any authority paperwork. He paused. If you are willing to stay, not because of the paper, not because of the deadline, not because Red Gallo and his 12 friends decided they wanted my land, then I will go to that office and I will put my name next to yours in that register, and I will mean it. He met her amber eyes. I mean, I would really mean it, not as a legal formality, as what I actually want. The silence was very long. The fire crackled. The wind pressed against the cabin walls. You would really mean it, she said. Not challenging, clarifying. Yes, he said. She looked at the table. She looked at her hands. She picked up the carved wolf from where it sat near her elbow. She had started keeping it on the kitchen table, he realized, sometime in the last few weeks, and turned it over in her fingers. My mother gave this to me, she said, when I left. She told me the Darkwolves were not broken by anything. She said we bent with the winter and rose with the spring. She turned the wolf over again. She did not say what to do when someone was kind to you. He waited. In my clan, the binding is made by choice, she said. Both people choose. That is what makes it real. She set the wolf down and looked at him directly. I have been choosing, Silas, since November, since the market day. Since the coat in the hand and every cold morning when I woke up and decided to stay. Her voice was very steady. I do not know your custom. I do not know what signing a paper in an office means to you. But if you mean it the way you say, if it is a choice, not an obligation, then I choose it too. He was looking at her, and his chest felt like it had been opened and something warm was filling it from the bottom up. "Then we will go to the office," he said, "and we will choose." He reached across the table again, like he had in December, and this time she reached back first, and they held hands across that kitchen table in the February cold, and it was as real as anything he had ever felt in his life. They drove to Dusk Creek on the following Monday, because Silas chose Monday and not Saturday, because Saturday was when the market crowd would be there, and this was not for the market crowd. He wore the wolf-lined coat she had made him. She wore her leather bodice and her burgundy blouse and her riding leathers, and she had redone her braids that morning with careful attention, and she looked, he thought privately, like someone walking into a decision they had already made and were not afraid of. The authority office was a square stone building near the north end of the main street, and Officer Crane was inside with the register, looking even more nervous than he had on the homestead. There was no crowd, just a fire in the corner stove and the smell of paper and ink and the sound of the wind outside. Crane opened the register. He showed them where to sign. He read the formal language of the settlement record, the land clause, the names, the date, the standard wording of recognized union under Borderlands Council terms. Silas picked up the pen. He looked at Mazoga. She looked back at him. "I do not know this custom," she said quietly. "Not completely. In my clan we would speak intentions. I do not know if you do that here." He looked at Crane. Crane blinked. "The signing is what is required," he said. "You may say whatever you like in addition." Silas set the pen down. He turned to face her properly, both of them standing before the register in the cold stone office. "My intention," he said, "is to build something with you. Not just land and crop, something real. I intend to know you better every year than the year before. I intend to stand beside you, not in front of you. I intend to earn what I ask you to give me. That is my intention." She looked at him for a long moment. Her amber eyes were bright. "My intention," she said, "is to stop expecting the worst from you and let myself believe the best. I intend to bring all of what I am to this place and not apologize for it. I intend to choose you not because I was sent here but because I am choosing it." She paused. "And I intend to build the fire myself sometimes, so you know I am here by choice." He smiled. He could not help it. She saw it and the corner of her mouth curved up. They signed the register. Crane recorded it. Outside, Dusk Creek went about its cold Monday morning business and did not notice. On the way out of the office, Silas held the door open for her, and when she walked through it she brushed close enough that her shoulder touched his, and it was not accidental on either side. They walked back through town to the wagon, and he reached out and she took his hand, and they walked like that through Dusk Creek in February, and let anyone who wanted to stare go right ahead and stare. Red Gallo was outside the saloon and he saw them, and his face did something complicated that was mostly defeat. Silas held his gaze for a moment and then looked away because Red Gallo was not worth more than a moment. He helped her up onto the wagon bench. This time she let him without calculating anything. She simply let him, and settled in close against the cold, and he climbed up beside her and took the reins, and their shoulders were pressed together all the way home through the winter trees. That evening she cooked something she had never made before, a clan dish, she said, that was for occasions. It involved dried berries and smoked meat and a spiced grain cake baked on the hearthstone, and it smelled like nothing he had ever had in his life and tasted like something he immediately wanted to remember. "We do not have a fire," she said after they had eaten. "For the ceremony, both of us building it." He looked at the hearth. He got up and went to the woodpile by the door and picked up 2 pieces of split pine. He held one out to her. She took it and looked at it, and then at him, and then they both crouched at the hearth and laid the wood on together, side by side, his hands in hers arranging the pieces, and he struck the flint and she caught the tinder and blew it to flame, and the fire built up between them in the dark February evening. She sat back on her heels and looked at it. He sat beside her on the hearth stones, close, their arms just touching. "There," he said, "we built a fire." She was quiet for a moment. Then very softly she said, "Yes, we did." He turned to look at her profile, the firelight on her face, the strong line of her jaw and the dark of her braids and the slow, difficult, beautiful thing that was happening in her expression. He said, "Mazoga." She turned. They were very close. He could see the amber of her eyes reflect the firelight and the particular quality of the look she was giving him, not guarded anymore, not evaluating, just present. He leaned forward and kissed her. She was still for one breath, and then she kissed him back, deliberate and warm and entirely chosen, her hand coming up to the side of his face with a tenderness that undid him completely, and the fire crackled beside them, and the winter world was locked outside the door, and it was just this. He pulled back and looked at her. She was looking at him with the most open expression he had ever seen on her face. "I have been wanting to do that for 2 months," he said. "I know," she said. "You knew." "I have eyes, Silas." He laughed an actual laugh, surprised out of him, and she looked startled by the sound of it, and then something spread across her face that was, unmistakably, uncomplicated joy. "Tell me more about your clan's fire ceremony," he said. "Tell me all of it." She leaned against his shoulder and began to talk, and the fire burned between them, and outside the winter went on being winter, and inside the Sullivan homestead there was warmth enough for two. Spring came the way it always did on the frontier, not gently, not all at once, but in fits of mud and melt and green that felt almost violent after the long white silence of winter. The south field needed turning, the kitchen garden needed expanding, the barn roof had developed a leak over the winter that required attention before the spring rains made it worse. There was work enough for 6 people, and only 2 of them to do it. They did it together. Silas had worked his land alone for 3 years since his father's death, and there was a quality of effort in solitary labor, a grinding, sustaining, slightly grim quality, that he had simply accepted as the cost of the life. What he had not expected was how fundamentally different it was to work alongside someone who matched him in commitment and exceeded him in several specific skills. Mazoga's knowledge of growing things went deeper than his in ways he found continuously surprising. She knew companion planting and soil rotation and seed selection with a sophistication that came from generations of clan knowledge about coaxing food from hard land. She knew structural repair and rope work, and the specific technique of persuading a reluctant animal that you were not a threat. She was also, he discovered that spring, extremely competitive about it. He fixed one section of the east fence and she examined it and told him the lower rail was not seated correctly. He said it was fine. She pulled it loose in one motion and reset it the correct way and put it back without comment. He stared at it for a moment and then started laughing, and she turned around with her arms crossed and said, "I am not wrong," in the tone of someone who had absolutely been waiting for him to acknowledge this. "You are never wrong," he said. "I am sometimes wrong," she said, "just not about fence rails." "Or soil," he said, "or soil." "Or the barn roof," he said. She had fixed the barn roof in a single afternoon using a combination of new shingles and a technique with pine pitch that he had never seen before and which was, by the evidence of the first spring rainstorm, definitively effective. "Or the barn roof," she agreed. He loved her. He was entirely certain of it by April. He did not say it because he was waiting for the right moment, and the right moment on a frontier homestead was somewhat harder to find than in a poem, but he was looking. He found it on a warm April evening when the world smelled like wet earth and new growth, and they had been working all day and were tired down to the bone and sitting on the porch steps in the last of the light. She was leaning against the porch post and he was on the step below her and her hand was resting near his shoulder, and neither of them had moved for 20 minutes. "Mazoga," he said. She said. "I love you," he said. Silence. Then she moved, she straightened slightly, and he turned to look at her, and she was looking at him with an expression that was very still and very full. "Say it again," she said. "I love you," he said. She pressed her lips together and he saw her throat move. "In my clan, that phrase does not translate exactly," she said. "We say something closer to, 'You are the weight that holds me to the ground.'" She met his eyes. "That is what it means to me when I say it." "You are the weight that holds me to the ground," he said. "Yes," she said, and her voice was rough at the edges. "That." He took her hand. She looked at their joined hands and then at him, and her free hand came up and touched his jaw, and he turned his face into it the way a person turns toward warmth. "I did not expect this," she said softly. "I did not believe it was possible, not here." "It happened anyway," he said. "Yes," she said. "It did." He turned and kissed her again, sitting there on the porch steps with the evening light going gold around them, and the spring earth smelling rich and alive and full of promise. And she kissed him back with all the careful walls down, all the distance closed, her hands on his face and his hands in her braids, and the whole world contracted to this single, burning, perfect moment. Later that spring, they slept in the same room. It was not sudden. It was the natural continuation of things that had been moving together slowly and honestly since February, like two streams finding the same river. There was a gentleness to it, and a tenderness, and the particular quality of deep trust that makes closeness mean something more than proximity. She fit against him in the dark like she had always been there, her warmth and the quiet strength of her presence filling the space that loneliness had lived in for 3 years. And he lay awake for a while with his arm around her, just breathing, aware of the enormous gift of this ordinary thing. She was not gone in the morning. She was there making tea when he woke, and she handed him the mug with the specific look she had that communicated affection without displaying it openly. And he took the mug and pulled her in by the wrist and kissed her good morning, and she said, "Your beard scratches." And he said, "I will shave." And she said, "No, do not," and that was that. The world outside the homestead was still complicated. Dusk Creek did not immediately transform into a community of warmth and welcome, because Silas Sullivan had signed a register. There were people who continued to regard Mazoga with suspicion or hostility, and there were social structures: the women's quilting circle, the Sunday assembly, the community work parties from which she was quietly excluded. He saw it, and it made him angry in a sustained, banked way. He mentioned it to her. "I know," she said. "I do not need their circles." "You might want them," he said. She thought about it. "Some of them," she said. "Not most, but some." She paused. "There is the woman at the grain store. Petra." He knew Petra, an older woman, a widow, who had run the grain store since her husband passed, and who was widely considered to have no patience for nonsense of any kind. "She speaks to me directly," Mazoga said. "She has not been warm, but she has been fair. That is something." It was something. Silas started making sure they went to the grain store together, and he stood back and let Mazoga handle the transaction, and he watched Petra and Mazoga begin the slow, careful negotiation of mutual respect that was the only kind either of them seemed to want. By summer, they were having brief conversations. By August, Petra was giving Mazoga seeds from her kitchen garden experiment, a cold-resistant strain of bean she had been developing for years. Mazoga took them with the gravity they deserved. She planted them carefully in a dedicated row and reported the results to Petra with agricultural precision, and Silas thought watching this unfold was one of the best things he had seen in a long time. He rode into Dusk Creek one July afternoon for hardware supplies, hinges for the new stable door, a coil of rope, a half-pound of nails, and came out of the hardware store to find a scene already in motion at the water trough near the livery. Red Gallo had Mazoga blocked against the trough wall, not touching her, not quite, but positioned in the deliberate way of someone using their body as intimidation, and he was speaking in a low, rapid tone that Silas could not hear from a distance. 3 of the watching horses tied nearby shifted nervously. 2 men nearby had stopped to watch but had not intervened. Silas crossed the street at a run. He covered the distance in 15 strides and put himself between Mazoga and Gallo with a shoulder roll that wasn't graceful but was absolutely effective, and he had Red Gallo by the collar of his coat before the man could recalibrate. "Take your hands off," Gallo started. "You listen to me," Silas said, very low and very clear, close enough to Gallo's face that there was no ambiguity about who the words were for. "You are going to stop this. All of it. You are going to stop the comments and the positioning and the games with the authority complaints, and you are going to walk away right now and find something productive to do with whatever misery you've got in you that makes this necessary. Because if you come near her again, if I hear your name near her again, I will pursue every legal recourse the borderland settlement gives me, and you will find out quickly that I have more rights in this county than you have hoped." Gallo's face was red, and his eyes were very bright with anger, but something in it broke. Silas had seen this before, the moment when someone realized the person they were pressing was not going to break in the way they needed them to. He let go of Gallo's collar. He stepped back. Gallo straightened his coat and looked at Mazoga, and then at Silas, and then he turned and walked away. His brother, who had been somewhere behind Silas the whole time, followed. The two bystanders who had watched without intervening looked away and went about their business. Silas turned to Mazoga. She was standing at the water trough with her arms at her sides and her chin up and her eyes very bright, and he recognized the absolute expenditure of controlled calm that had held her perfectly still through that. "Are you all right?" he said. "He did not touch me," she said. "That is not what I asked." She looked at him and the control shifted. Not collapsed, she was too careful for collapse, but shifted to something more honest. "No," she said. "I am not all right, but I will be." He nodded. He reached out and took her hand and held it, and she held his, right there in the middle of the main street of Dust Creek in July, and he did not care about any of the eyes on them, and she seemed to have made the same decision. They rode home. He did not talk much on the way. She was quiet too, but it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that was processing something important. When they got back to the homestead and he had unhitched the horses, she caught him by the arm as he was heading to put the hardware away. He turned. She put both hands on his chest and looked at him and said, "I need you to know something." "Tell me," he said. "I have never in all my years in the clan and in all my months here had someone do what you do," she said. "Not my father, not any man in the clan, not anyone." Her voice was very steady, but the steadiness was costing her. "You stand beside me. You stand in front of me when you have to. You say my name when others do not say it at all." She looked at him directly. "I do not know what I did to deserve that. But I am not going to keep waiting to say that I know it, and I am grateful for it, and I love you. Completely." He set the hardware on the ground and put his arms around her and held her properly, not a careful half embrace, but a full, genuine, "This is exactly where you belong" kind of hold, and she pressed her face against his neck and he felt her breathe, long and slow, and releasing something she had been holding a long time. "You deserve it," he said, "all of it." "I am still getting used to that," she said, muffled against his collar. "Get used to it," he said. "I am not going anywhere." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Nor am I." Autumn came around again, and it felt entirely different than the first autumn. Less like the beginning of an unknown thing, and more like the settling into the substance of something known and chosen. The homestead had changed under two pairs of hands. The garden was twice the size, better organized, yielding a surplus that they sold at the market in a stall they set up themselves, side by side. The barn was sound. The South Field's winter wheat was thicker than any yield Silas had managed alone. There was a chicken coop now. Mazoga had wanted chickens, and a second storeroom that they had built together from timber he had felled, and she had helped him dress, a construction project that had taken most of August and had involved a remarkable number of arguments about joinery that she had been right about every single time. She was pregnant by October. She told him in the kitchen in the morning, with her hands flat on the table and her amber eyes on his face, reading him the way she always read him, completely and accurately. He sat down because he needed to. He looked at her. He thought about his father who had built this land and then failed to say what mattered to the son who inherited it. He thought about Mazoga's father who had sent her away as a settlement term without asking. He thought about what kind of parent he intended to be. "I am going to be terrified for 9 months," he said. She did not look away. "I am terrified already," she said. Good, he said. Then we are in it together, she exhaled. He stood up and came around the table, and she stood, and he held her face in his hands and looked at her. You are going to be extraordinary, he said. We do not know that, she said. I know it, he said. She pressed her forehead against his. They stood there in the kitchen in the October morning with everything changed and everything the same, and it was enormous and quiet and completely real. He sent word to the Borderlands Authority, as required by the settlement terms, that the union had produced a pregnancy. He sent word to no one else. He and Mazoga agreed that the homestead was its own world, and who knew what happened there was their choice. Petra knew. She came out one afternoon in November with a wool blanket she had woven herself thick and beautifully patterned, and handed it to Mazoga at the door without ceremony and said, Orcs gestate 8.5 months, same as humans. The cold will be harder for the child's first weeks. Line the crib with this. She turned and walked back to her wagon. Mazoga stood in the doorway holding the blanket, and Silas watched her face go through several things very quickly before settling into something that was undeniably moved. I did not know she knew about gestation, Mazoga said. She raised 5 children, Silas said. She knows about gestation. She brought the blanket inside and folded it very carefully, and set it in the corner of the room where they had already begun to clear space. The winter this year was not as brutal as the last, but it had its own challenges. A stretch of ice rain in January that made everything treacherous, the mare going lame and requiring weeks of care, a problem with the wells drawing rope that took 3 days and a great deal of creativity to solve. Mazoga worked through all of it with a determination and practicality that amazed him, though he also pushed her, carefully and consistently, to let him take the heavier physical loads. She let him. Not always without argument, but eventually. There were also, in the long winter evenings, conversations about the child that went deep into who they each were, and what they wanted to pass on, and what they wanted to leave behind. She told him about the traditions she wanted to teach clan stories, the Darkwolf language that she spoke only to herself but wanted the child to know, the knowledge of growing things and reading weather and moving through wild land. He told her about what he wanted: honest work, books, the ability to fix a thing rather than replacing it, the knowledge that love was a decision you kept making rather than something that happened to you once. She listened to all of it and said, We are going to give this child too many things. That is the idea, he said. She smiled at him fully, openly. The complete smile that he had learned over this year was not freely given and therefore worth everything when it appeared. The baby came in late March, with the first genuine warmth of spring trying to push through the cold, and Petra came out to the homestead for it and brought a midwife from the valley named Helene who had experience with half-orc births, and it was long and difficult in the way of first births, and Silas stayed where Mazoga allowed him to be, which was close, and he held her hand for hours, and was aware every moment of the profound magnitude of what was happening. The child that arrived was a boy. He was smaller than either of them had expected, with his mother's green-tinted skin and his father's blue eyes, which was a combination that struck them both into speechlessness for a full minute. He had a small, perfectly formed pair of very slight lower tusks in Silas's jawline and Mazoga's hands, which were already visibly strong. Mazoga held him against her chest and looked at him with an expression Silas had no words for, because it contained things that language could not hold efficiently. The terror and the wonder and the profound claiming of this small person, the recognition of something that was hers completely in a way she had never been prepared for. Silas sat beside them on the bed and put one hand on the baby's back and one on hers and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the 3 of them being in the same room did not already say better. They named him Fennec Darkwolf Sullivan. Fennec because it had been Silas's mother's family name. Darkwolf Sullivan because both of them were in him and both names would be carried. Petra, before she left the next morning, held the baby briefly and looked at him with the same practical assessment she gave everything. Healthy, she said. Strong lungs. He will be loud. She handed him back to Mazoga and looked at both of them and said, "You have built something real here. I want you to know I see it." She left without waiting for a response, which was exactly like her, and Mazoga looked at Silas with the baby in her arms and said, "That might be the nicest thing anyone in Dust Creek has said to us." "It is the nicest thing Petra has said to anyone in living memory," he agreed. Fennec was, as Petra predicted, very loud. He was also, they discovered in the weeks that followed, intensely curious about everything, and possessed of an athletic quality in his limbs that suggested he was going to be mobile at the earliest possible opportunity. He watched the world with enormous dark amber eyes, Mazoga's eyes in shape, Silas's shade blended into them, and the directness of his gaze was remarkable and occasionally unnerving. Mazoga was a natural mother in the way that Silas was not surprised by and was completely moved by. She was calm and competent and did not flinch from anything, and she had a particular way of speaking to the baby, a low, rhythmic murmuring in the Darkwolf language that was the most beautiful sound Silas had ever heard that settled Fennec absolutely every time. He wanted to learn it. He told her this one evening. She looked at him for a moment. "You want to learn the clan language?" "I want to understand what you are telling our son," he said, "and I want to speak it to him too, so he has both." She taught him through that spring and summer the way she did everything with exactness and patience and a consistency that demanded the same from him. He was slow. He made mistakes that she corrected without mockery. He practiced late in the evening after the baby was asleep, and she graded his progress with honest accuracy that was, he realized, the same thing she used for fence rails and soil composition and structural repair. He was being built correctly, the Darkwolf way. He loved her more for it than he had words to say. The second summer on the homestead with Fennec was the summer that things changed more permanently in Dust Creek. It was not a single event but a series of them. The way the community's position on something shifts, not through arguments but through accumulation. The summer that the harvest festival fell apart because of a drought that had hit 3 farms hard, and Silas organized the community work party to help with the salvage, and Mazoga's knowledge of water management, of directing what little there was, of which crops to prioritize was so demonstrably valuable that there was no way to be hostile to the person who had just saved your harvest without looking like an idiot. Red Gallo looked like an idiot for most of August, but even he eventually fell quiet on the subject of the Sullivans. It was also the summer that 2 new families arrived in the Dust Creek Valley, settlers from further east. One of them, a mixed household with a half-orc son who was 12 years old and had his mother's green skin and his father's brown eyes, and the specific, armored quietness of a child who had been stared at by strangers many times. He was called Marsh. Mazoga saw him at the market in July, and she went to him directly, across the crowd, and crouched down in front of him and said something in the Darkwolf language, just a few words. The boy's eyes went wide. He said something back, haltingly in the same tongue, a different dialect clearly but recognizable. She nodded and said something else, and he nodded, and she touched the back of his hand briefly and straightened and walked away. His parents had watched the whole thing. His mother, a human woman, came to Mazoga with water in her eyes and said, "Thank you. He has not spoken that language to anyone since his grandmother passed." Mazoga said, "He is welcome at our homestead whenever he would like. We have room." Silas, standing a few feet away with Fennec in his arms, watched this happen and felt something expand in his chest that was about more than the 2 of them. Something about what they had been building and what it was becoming. Something about the way a specific kindness could create space for other people to be themselves. He walked over and stood beside Mazoga and introduced himself to the parents and said, genuinely, "You are welcome neighbors. This valley is better for having you in it." They shook hands. The mother looked at him and Mazoga and the green-skinned baby in his arms, and she said, "We heard there was a Sullivan homestead here. A human man and an orc wife. We came this way partly because of it." He looked at her. "Because of us." Because of what it meant, she said simply, that it was possible. He looked at Mazoga. She looked at him. There was between them in that moment a quality of recognition of the shape of what they had built and what it meant beyond their own walls that moved them both without a word being said. Fennec, who had been eyeing the boy Marsh with great interest, reached out one small hand toward him. Marsh looked at the baby, and then at his mother, and then reached out one finger, and Fennec grabbed it with the grip of someone who intended to hold on. Autumn came around for the third time on the Sullivan homestead, and it was different from both the ones before. The fields were productive beyond anything Silas had managed alone, the result of 3 seasons of Mazoga's knowledge applied to the land, the crop rotation and soil care, and the cold-resistant beans from Petra's strain that had proven themselves in both hard springs since their introduction. The barn was sound and full and warm. The chicken coop had expanded. There was a new storage cellar that Marsh's father, a carpenter by trade, had helped them build over the summer in exchange for Mazoga's labor helping his wife's kitchen garden get established. The homestead was no longer a one-man operation on the edge of survival. It was something else. Something alive and various and built by hands from 2 different worlds, which had turned out to matter less than the intentions behind them. Dust Creek itself had shifted. Not transformed, the frontier did not transform, it accommodated, which was its own kind of changing. There was still prejudice in the town, still hardness, still people who would never come around. But there were also people who had. Petra, who had become a fixture of sorts in the homestead's life, coming out every few weeks, always with something practical and always without sentiment, which was exactly the kind of friendship Mazoga seemed most comfortable with. The parents of Marsh, who were becoming genuine neighbors in the full sense. A young couple who had arrived from the eastern settlements and who came to the Sullivans for advice on establishing their homestead the way new settlers always came to the people who had been there longer. Silas and Mazoga were, he realized, becoming the kind of people that other people came to. He was at the porch rail one October evening, watching the sun drop behind the western ridge in the slow orange explosion it always made when the air was clear, Fennec asleep inside, Mazoga's hand finding his at the railing the way it did not reach for exactly, just placed there, as though their hands knew the way to each other by now without direction. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. "I was afraid," she said. "When I came here, I do not think I have said that plainly. I was afraid of everything. Of you, of this town, of what my life was going to be in a place that did not want me." She paused. "I had decided on the wagon from the east that I would last the winter and then find another way, that whatever this was I would not let it become a trap." "I know," he said. "You know. I could see it," he said. "Every morning for the first month you were always facing the door." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When did I stop?" He thought about it. "December," he said. "After the market day. You started facing the window instead." She was silent again. Then very quietly she said, "I did not know you were watching that carefully." "I was watching everything," he said. "You were worth watching." She turned to look at him, and in the amber evening light she was so beautiful that he had the same feeling he always had, that it was something he could look at his whole life without reaching the end of it. The strength of her, the grace of her, the particular quality of her attention when it was focused on him. "I love this," she said, "all of it. The land and the work and the terrible fence rails and that impossible mare and Petra bringing wool blankets without being asked." She paused. "I love you. You are the weight that holds me to the ground," he said. She smiled, the full one. He kissed her there at the porch rail with the autumn sunset behind them and the smell of wood smoke and harvest and the first cool breath of the coming season. And she kissed him back with everything she was, no walls, no calculation, no distance. Just Mazoga, full and present and entirely, finally home. He pulled her in close and she rested against his chest and he held her there in the evening, both of them looking at the land that spread out below the house in the last of the light, the winter wheat already greening in the south field, the garden beds put to sleep, The whole 50 acres solid and productive and real. We could build on, she said. In the spring. There is a good site on the East Hill. We could, he said. What would we build? Another room, she said. Maybe two, she paused. Marcia's family might want to take on the adjacent claim if it comes available. We could share a fence line. We could, he said. That would be something. It would be community, she said. The clan kind, where you build toward each other instead of against. He thought about that. Yes, he said. That is what it would be. Fennec's voice came from inside. Not a cry of distress, but the particular determined vocalization of a not quite 1 year old, who had woken and found no one nearby and had opinions about this situation. Mazoga pulled away and went inside, and Silas followed, and when he came through the door she was already at the crib, lifting the boy up, speaking softly in the Darkwolf language, and Fennec's small face went from aggrieved to interested in the specific way it always did when she spoke to him in that tongue. Silas lit the evening lamp and the kitchen filled with warm light. He looked at his family, this extraordinary woman and their extraordinary boy and the life they had built in this place, and felt a gratitude so complete and uncomplicated that it was almost physical, like the coat she had made him, lined all the way through with something that kept out the cold. That spring, they broke ground on the East Hill extension. Marcia's father helped frame the walls. Marsh himself, who had become a fixture of the homestead in the way children become fixtures when they are given room to belong, carried wood and fetched nails, and kept Fennec occupied with a solemn responsibility that was deeply charming to everyone who watched it. Petra came and looked at the foundation and said it was not as level as she would like and spent 40 minutes explaining exactly why and what to do about it. And Mazoga listened to every word and then made the corrections with Silas, and together they got the foundation right. By summer the new room was closed in. By fall it was habitable. By the following spring it was clear that it was needed because Mazoga told him, one morning at the kitchen table with the same hands-flat directness as the first time, that there was going to be another child. He sat down again. He was getting better at it, but it still required sitting down. This time it was a girl. She arrived in the deep of the following winter, smaller than her brother had been and louder from the first breath, with her father's brown hair thicker than his, but undeniably his shade, and her mother's amber eyes, the strongest amber eyes Silas had ever seen, and a set of the most determined lower tusks on a newborn that Helene the midwife said she had ever witnessed. They named her Wren Darkwolf Sullivan. Wren for the bird Silas had always liked, small and incongruously loud, territorial, always building things. Darkwolf Sullivan because that was who they were. Fennec was 18 months old when Wren arrived and treated her with a level of proprietary fascination that made every adult in his vicinity smile constantly. He spoke to her in the Darkwolf words he was already absorbing, apparently believing that language, at minimum, was important enough to get right from the beginning. The homestead entered a new season of its life, busy in the way of places with small children, and a great deal of productive work, and a web of connections to other people who were also building things. Marcia's family had taken the adjacent claim, and the fence line they shared was the most meticulously maintained fence in the valley, because Mazoga and Marcia's mother had made it a point of collaborative pride. Petra's bean strain had spread to 4 homesteads now, and was formally being called the Dust Creek Cold strain, which Petra thought was excessively sentimental but did not protest. There was still prejudice in the wider world. The Borderlands Authority was still a complicated institution that required navigation. There were still towns further east where Mazoga would not be safe, and further north, where the remains of old clan territories made travel uncertain. The world had not fixed itself because 2 people had chosen each other. It was not that simple, and it was never going to be. But here, in this valley, on this 50 acres of land that a man and a woman had worked together with their hands and their knowledge and their willingness to learn from each other, Something had been built that was genuinely different. Something that bore the weight of being an example, not in the grand political sense, not in the way that anyone had planned, but in the small, daily, visible sense of, here is a thing that is possible. Here are two people who chose each other and built real lives, and the ground did not open up and swallow them. Marsh was 15 by the time Fennec was 3, and he was tall now and quiet and capable in ways that reminded Silas of Mazoga, the same economy of motion, the same precise evaluation behind the eyes. He had started learning the blacksmithing trade from the valley smith, and he came to the homestead on weekends and ate at the Sullivan table as naturally as if he had always been there. On one of those autumn Sundays, Silas watched Marsh and Mazoga in the kitchen garden together, Marsh holding Fennec on one hip while Mazoga showed him something about seed selection, and Fennec was listening with his enormous amber eyes going between them, and Wren was on Silas's back, wrapped up against the October cold, her small chin resting on his shoulder. He stood there at the edge of the garden and understood completely what his father's arrangement had been trying to create and had gotten wrong, and what he and Mazoga had somehow gotten right by accident and choice and stubbornness, and the specific willingness to be honest with a stranger. His father had wanted security, a bond that would hold. He had reached for it through transaction and obligation. What Silas had found instead was something that held because it had been freely chosen and kept being chosen, every morning and every evening, in the fence rails and the fire and the shared work, and the words said honestly in cold kitchens and warm beds and porch rails at sunset. That evening, when the children were asleep and the homestead was quiet, Silas and Mazoga sat on the porch in their coats, his the wolf-lined one, still going strong in its 4th year, though she had repaired it twice, and looked at the stars that the clear autumn sky was doing its best to crowd in every direction. "Mazoga," he said. "What?" she said, the way she said it when she was comfortable, not a question, just a sound that meant she was here and listening. "I want to do your ceremony," he said. "The clan one, the real one." She turned to look at him. The lantern light from the window caught her face. "We already signed the register," she said. "I know," he said. "I want to do yours too. We said we would make our own custom, and I think our custom should include both." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said there should be witnesses. "Marsh's family," he said. "Petra, anyone you want. There should be a fire," she said, "that we both build. I will cut the wood tomorrow," he said. "There should be intentions spoken," she said, "in front of everyone, both of us." "I have been practicing," he said. She looked at him. "You have been practicing." "For about 3 weeks," he said. She looked at the stars for a moment. Then, with the particular softness she had that was all the more moving for being rare. "So have I," he laughed, and she laughed, and the sound of it went out into the clear, cold autumn night, and the stars went on being stars, indifferent and beautiful, and the Sullivan homestead was lit from within and sound at its bones. They held the ceremony on a Saturday in late October, when the mountains were the deepest blue they went, and the valley had that crystalline quality of the first real cold. They set the fire ring in the clearing between the house and the east hill, in the open where everyone could see it. Marsh's family came. Petra came in her good coat, without fanfare or sentimentality, which was the same as everything Petra did. Helene from the valley came, and 2 of the neighboring settler families who had become genuine friends over the years. Fennec was 3 and wore a very serious expression, because he understood something important was happening, though not precisely what. Wren was bundled against Marsh's chest and regarded everything with the slightly suspicious amber-eyed assessment that was already entirely her mother. Silas and Mazoga stood at the fire ring with a pile of split wood between them. He looked at her in her leather bodice and burgundy blouse and her riding leathers, her braids done with the complex care she took on occasions, her face open and warm and present in the autumn light. She nodded to him. He nodded back. They built the fire together. Every piece of wood placed by both hands, neither one alone. The way she had described it that first long night when she said, "I do not know this custom," and meant the piece of paper, and he had asked her about her own. When the fire was burning, they turned to face each other. He spoke his intentions. He said them in plain, honest words, to be the kind of man this land and this woman and these children deserved. To keep choosing her. To keep learning from her. To build with her toward everything worth building. He said them in common tongue and then, stumbling a little but getting the shape of it right, in the words she had taught him in Darkwolf language, so the thing was said in both their languages and was therefore entirely theirs. She pressed her lips together when he finished. He saw the brightness in her eyes. She spoke her intentions. She said them with the precision she brought to everything and the depth she brought to nothing except the things that mattered most. She said she intended to bring her full self to this life and not leave parts of herself behind out of fear. She said she intended to be chosen and to keep choosing. She said she intended to make this land and this family and this small and complicated community something that proved a simple thing, that two people from different worlds could make a world of their own. She said it first in Darkwolf language and then in common tongue. When she finished, the gathered people were very quiet. The fire burned between them, the one they had built together. Silas stepped forward and took her face in his hands, and she looked at him with all of it. Every year of choosing, every winter survived, every fence rail and harvest and sleepless night and hard morning and moment of grace. And he kissed her in front of all of them, and they held it. And when they parted, she was still in his hands and his eyes were stinging from the smoke, and she was the most beautiful thing he had ever looked at in his entire life. The people around them made sounds that were not quite applause and not quite cheers, but were the frontier equivalent solid, warm, genuine acknowledgement of something real. Petra was heard to say, to no one in particular, "Well, it took them long enough." That night, after Fennec and Wren were asleep and Marsh's family had gone home, and Petra's lantern had moved down the road, Silas and Mazoga sat at the kitchen table. Not across from each other the way they had in the beginning, with the careful distance of strangers. Beside each other, her shoulder against his, the fire burning down to embers. The wolf carving was on the table. It always was now. He picked it up and turned it in his hands. She watched him. "Your mother said the Darkwolves bent with the winter and rose with the spring," he said. "Yes," she said. "I think she was right," he said. He set the wolf back down. "I think you are proof of that." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We are proof of it." He put his arm around her and she settled against him the way she had learned to, easily, without architecture, as if it were the most natural position in the world, which it was. It had become the most natural position in the world. The fire settled. The wind moved outside. The stars were doing what they always did. In the rooms above, their children slept, Fennec and Wren Darkwolf Sullivan, who would grow up knowing 2 languages and 2 traditions, and the specific knowledge that love was not something you inherited, but something you decided and kept deciding, and who would carry both names into a world that was still complicated and still hard and still worth everything you put into it. Silas held his wife in the quiet of the kitchen and thought about the piece of paper that had been nailed to a post in Dust Creek on a Tuesday in autumn, 4 years ago. He thought about the wagon from the east and the woman who had stepped down from it and looked at the crowd with amber eyes that were not afraid but absolutely, precisely counting the cost of everything. He thought about the fire they had built together, the first time in February, with 2 pieces of split pine on the hearthstone. He thought about all the fires since. He pressed his lips to the top of her head, and she made a small sound that was contentment, and the Sullivan homestead held them both, solid and warm and entirely, finally, theirs.